Hello, you're watching Global Insight, where we speak to experts from around the world on issues making headlines. I'm Young. The government is seeking to undo the 52-hour workweek policy introduced in 2018, which caps the maximum hours of work a week at 40 hours with 12 hours of overtime allowed with the consent of the employee. For businesses that experience varying seasonal demand and workflow, the policy has made little sense. Some have argued that it even reduces productivity and workers cannot make as much as they used to. On the other hand, South Koreans work some of the longest hours in the world, and the shorter work week has been rather beneficial. So what would it mean for South Korean workers and businesses if the policy is scrapped just 2 years after it came into effect? For this, we have joining us Kye-taik, Director of Wage and Job Innovation Research Center at the Korea Labour Institute, and Jun-sok, Professor of Economics at the Catholic University of Korea. Very warm welcome to you both. And
hello.
Good to see you.
hello, good to see you on this snowy day. And my first question to you, Director Oh. Now, the previous administration's 52-hour workweek policy, that drew a lot of criticism from the business sector at the time, and they're still pretty angry about this. So in terms of the impact of the policy, has there been any noticeable effects in the nearly 2 years that it's been in force? I mean, has it improved productivity or at least the work-life balance?
First of all, just 2 years of policy implementation is not enough long to evaluate the policy impact. The Korean workers worked more than 50 years with the traditional working hour system. Therefore, they need more time to be familiar with the new working hour system, I think. Secondly, there will be some productivity improvement because we do not observe a big change of the Korean economy, even though Korean working hours have been decreased with the implementation of a 52-hour work week policy. This means that Korean average productivity has been increased somewhat during last 2 years. Thirdly, they have some positive effect on work-life balance of Korean workers. Working hours for extra work has been decreased, and Korean people would have more time for leisure. I think there is some related phenomena like a value of MZ generation. Young workers do not want to work longer time, even with some extra wage. They prefer to spend more time on their own interest. Fourthly, last 2 years were overlapped with COVID-19 period. Korean and global economy has been influenced by COVID-19 very much. Therefore, it is hard to distinguish between demand decrease and supply decrease during COVID-19 period. The effect of a working hour policy change would be quite different if we do not experience COVID-19 in the meantime.
I see. I mean, COVID-19 did throw off everybody, basically. And Professor Yang, well, the OECD's data last month, though, it shows that South Korean workers, their average working hours totaled over 1,900 hours in 2021, and that would be the 5th longest in the 38-member organization. And it's an improvement from the past, I suppose, but still, there's always room for more improvement, right? So what's really the rationale for the government wanting to scrap the policy of 52 hours a week? I mean, what's the rationale for allowing it to be even longer than that?
Okay, well, I think it's a second best solution. The Korean labor efficiency, productivity is fairly low among OECD countries. So while we work longer hours, some of those hours, especially for office workers, are basically just doing very little. Now, part of the reason that our labor hours are less perhaps efficient and productive is because of labor market inflexibility. Consider what you call crunch time. Ideally, if you have a lot of tasks that has to be done in a certain time during the month or time during the year, you want to hire temporary workers so you could do that extra work that comes in certain periods. But if you have labor market inflexibility, you cannot really hire those part-time workers very easily. So what you do instead is hire full-time workers, and some of those workers are not going to have much to do during non-crunch times. Now, because of the inflexible labor market, if you have to hire full-time workers to just deal with what happens during the crunch time, then you're not going to want to hire full-time workers as much as possible because that adds to your production costs. What you're going to do is to ask the existing workers to work more, and that seems to be driving the why Korea has such high working hours. But so the ideal solution to this is to have a more flexible labor market where you can hire temporary workers during crunch times. But Korea seems to be really against having these temporary workers. So having to hire full-time workers to do crunch time work it seems to be the second best solution. And if you're going to have to hire extra workers who are non-productive a lot of times, you're not going to want to do that. So instead, you're asking the existing workers to work more. And what the government initiative wants to do is to have the arrangement so that during crunch times you can work more, and during non-crunch times you can work less. So you would still, on the average, work maybe 52 hours or less during the week, but during crunch times you would have more flexibility.
I see. Well, that does sound ideal, but I think in media every day is crunch time, unfortunately. But now, Director Oh, even with the 52-hour work week in place, the number of deaths related to overwork, that's been on the rise since 2017, from 399 to 565 people last year. I mean, would you see that as a failure of policy?
Oh, I think it's a kind of tricky question. I think it is hard to say strongly just with this change of figure because there would be many factors to influence this rise of deaths related to overwork. There has been big and fast technological changes during this period. Some industry would be in the rise. On the other hand, some the other industries would be diminished. There would be some environmental changes, including climate crisis. Therefore, it is hard to decrease the number of deaths related to overwork with just only working hour policy. In addition, we need much more data related to workers' health conditions, as well as just the number of deaths related to overwork. For example, how many workers' health condition would be improved after the introduction of a 52-hour work week policy, including workers' mental health conditions. Therefore, I think it is too early to strongly estimate the effect of 52-hour work week policy. In addition, we need more research on the interaction between working hour policy and other policy like economic policy and then industry policy. If some economic policy or industrial policy is changing, then the effect of a 52-hour work week policy would be changed too.
I see. So there are other policies, other factors that need to be taken into consideration. And well, Dr. Oh, what would the Yoon administration's push to extend the maximum work hours to up to 69 hours per week, some media reports say, what would that really mean for the average worker? I mean, would it be in their interest to do so?
I think the Yoon's administration has some interest in labor market reform. I think the most important labor market reform is the working hour system and then wage system. The concern for wage time is that the previous 52-hour work week policy is too rigid. Depending on industry areas, some companies need more flexible working hour practices. For example, some companies have more demand during the summertime. Therefore, they need to work more time during the summertime. However, these companies would have lower demand during the winter time, and they would work less working hours during this winter time. Within the 52 hours working hour policy framework, it is hard to reconcile this difference between summer, and wintertime demands. However, if extra working hour policy is more flexible, they can save some extra working time during the summertime, and they can make up working time shortage during the wintertime. For example, Germany uses working time account system in which workers can add or subtract from their working time account. I think US administration has some intention to make Korea's working hour system more flexible. However, there are some concerns about the new working hour system. For example, workers would do more working hours with the same wage level, and there would be the workers' health problem if workers work too long hours.
I see. And Professor Yang, well, the business sector has, of course, long complained about South Korea having very strong labor-related laws that really make it difficult for them to let go of workers, move them around a bit, and laws that also penalize business owners or executives for fatal industrial accidents. And, well, to what extent are they right, and which of their claims should be really just be taken with a grain of salt as well?
Okay, well, labor inflexibility, I think, is a serious problem. The very difficulties you have in moving workers around to appropriate jobs, being very hard to fire workers, I think, is very detrimental to Korea's productivity. It's not only a problem for existing firms, but it's also a problem for entrepreneurship and creating new firms, because, well, let's say that you want to create a firm and you're unlucky, and you have to you're in danger of bankruptcy, so you want to get rid of your company, but it'll be very hard to do that if you cannot fire workers easily. So it does hit not only the flexibility of existing firms, but flexibility, creation of potential firms as well. For industrial accidents, yes, there are cases where the procedure to punish owners and executives may help, especially if you're in a company where you have very lax management, not taking care of safety measures. But in other countries, you don't really do that through putting executives and the heads of companies, chairmen, in prison, partially because, well, it's more of a problem with people on the ground rather than people on the top. People under the underground may decide to ignore safety measures because, well, they may not care that much. They may underestimate their risk. They may want to get home quickly, finish the work as quickly as possible. People in my generation, well, sometimes they paired two people to work at a dangerous task, but what often happened is the senior person just took a rest somewhere else while the junior person did all the work. So you need proper supervision, and you need to do that on the ground. And punishing the heads may not be the best way of doing it. Other countries like the United States or Europe, if you have problems like these, if you have avoidable accidents, then that is taken care of a lot of times, not by criminal law, but by civil proceedings with damages. For unavoidable accidents, you usually have insurance to cover any costs and people being hurt. But in Korea, well, those type of insurance or those type of civil lawsuits, they do not seem to be very popular, and the government tries to replace that with criminal law, which I think may not be appropriate.
Before we go, Dr. Oh, now, flexible work hours, they've long been discussed, but they've never really turned into practice and policy. So how should South Korea introduce flexible work hours into the workplace?
Theoretically, the flexible working hour practice is the win-win strategy, since workers would have more discretion in their working time, and employers would have an advantage of cost savings and escaping from the additional employment. However, practically, it is not easy to implement the flexible working hour practices in the workplace. First, most of our workers were less likely to be familiar with relatively new types of working hour practices. Second, we need to change our way of working to implement flexible working hour practices. However, most of our workers would prefer to work with the traditional working method. Therefore, even though flexible working hour practices have some advantages, it is not easy to introduce them in the workplace. However, we experienced a big change in the COVID-19 period. Many companies, regardless of company size and industry, introduced a variety of flexible working hour practices during COVID-19 period. In the past, we have more familiar working hour practices. However, during COVID-19 period, most of companies could not use these traditional working hour practices. Therefore, most of them try to use various ways of working hour practices. Therefore, I think Korean companies can utilize these kind of the flexible working hour practices. However, companies and workers need some extra effort to utilize these flexible working hour practices. I think workers and company need to build more trust in working hour system.
Mm-hmm. So definitely flexibility is needed there, and a lot of creativity.
If I can make just one more point,
sure.
Very short. I think the flexible working hours should be different from industry to industry. Some industries, 52-hour hour may be too much to expect, for example, truck drivers. But for other industries, well, they may be easily be able to handle more than 52 hours. So you really need industry level approach. And the way to do that is through negotiations with workers and management in each industry.
That's definitely a very important point. I think Director O would completely agree with you there. And well, I'm afraid this is where we'll have to wrap up the discussion today, but hopefully the discussion will go on. Well, that was Kye-taik, Director of Wage and Job Innovation Research Center at the Korea Labour Institute, and Jun-sok, Professor of Economics at the Catholic University of Korea. Thank you both so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Also, thank you to our viewers. We'll be back tomorrow at the same time on Arirang TV, so do tune in then. Goodbye.